The cold metal hallways of Galactic Medical Station Omega stretched endlessly in all directions, filled with the kind of silence that comes when hope has almost died. This wasn't the comfortable quiet of a sleeping hospital at night. This was the heavy, suffocating silence that settles over a place where miracles have stopped happening. Dr. Vorthok stood perfectly still beside a glowing medical pod, his 6 arms crossed in a gesture that somehow looked both alien and universally familiar. Inside the pod lay a small Zilithian child, no bigger than a human 7-year-old. The boy's skin looked like living glass, normally bright and shimmering with beautiful patterns of light. But today, those patterns were fading. Each pulse of light grew dimmer and slower, like a dying star flickering its last moments across the galaxy. The chief physician had seen thousands of patients. During his long career, he had witnessed medical miracles that defied explanation and watched hopeless cases turn around in ways that made even the most experienced doctors believe in something greater than science. But this case was different. This time, all the advanced technology in the galaxy couldn't save one small child. "We have exhausted every possible treatment option," Dr. Vorthok said to the team of specialists gathered around him. His voice carried the weight of absolute certainty, the kind that comes from running every test, trying every procedure, and consulting with the brightest medical minds across multiple star systems. "The neural crystal network is deteriorating too rapidly for our intervention methods to be effective." The Thaxian neural specialist, a towering blue creature with intricate tattoos covering her scaled arms, nodded slowly. She had spent the last week trying to map the boy's failing nervous system, using equipment so advanced it could track individual neural impulses as they traveled through crystalline pathways. Even with all that technology, she had found no solution. The Mindari healer, whose species was known throughout the galaxy for their ability to sense and manipulate life energy, simply closed her large, dark eyes. When a Mindari healer gave up, it meant the life force itself was beyond reach. Across the room, the boy's parents stood together, their own crystal formations growing dim with grief. Zilithians communicated partly through the light patterns in their skin, and right now, their bodies told a story of heartbreak that needed no translation. The father's normally bright blue crystals had turned a deep, dull gray. The mother's delicate formations, which usually sparkled like captured starlight, now barely glowed at all. They had already lost 2 other children to this same rare genetic condition. This boy was their last hope for continuing their family line. The medical team began discussing the next steps with the clinical detachment that medical professionals develop as a survival mechanism. They talked about pain management protocols, about making the child comfortable in his final days, about preparing the parents for what was coming. It was all very professional, very thorough, very hopeless, but in the far corner of the medical bay, largely ignored by the alien medical staff, stood a human woman named Emily Watson. She was small by human standards, maybe 5 feet 4 inches tall, with graying brown hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, and hands that showed the wear of someone who had spent decades caring for others. She wore a plain blue uniform that marked her as part of the new Interspecies Adoption Initiative, a program designed to help alien children find homes across species barriers. Emily had been standing there for nearly an hour, watching and listening as the medical team worked. She understood maybe half of the technical terms they were using, but she didn't need a medical degree to recognize what was happening. She had seen this exact scene play out hundreds of times before, in hospitals and foster homes across Earth. The expressions were universal, even on alien faces. The slumped shoulders, the quiet voices, the way everyone seemed to be looking anywhere except at the dying child. This was what giving up looked like, whether you were human, Zilithian, or anything in between. Emily's own weathered hands were clasped tightly together, her knuckles white with tension. This wasn't her case, technically. She was here to observe and learn about alien childcare practices, not to interfere with medical procedures. But watching this unfold felt like being asked to stand quietly while a house burnt down around her. Emily had reached her breaking point. She watched as the alien doctors began switching off their incredibly advanced machines, each beep and hum falling silent as they accepted defeat. The sound of hope dying was apparently the same across the galaxy. She couldn't just stand there anymore, watching another child be written off as impossible to save. She took a deep breath and stepped forward into the circle of alien medical professionals. They towered over her, some by several feet, but Emily had learned long ago that authority didn't always come from size or fancy equipment. Sometimes it came from simply refusing to walk away when everyone else had given up. "Excuse me," she said, her voice quiet but firm enough to cut through all the complex medical discussions happening around her. Every eye in the room turned toward her. Some of these doctors had probably never been interrupted by a human before, especially not some small foster care worker who had no business being in their sterile medical environment. Dr. Vorthex's eyes all focused on Emily at once, creating an intimidating stare that might have made most humans take a step back. But Emily had been stared down by angry social workers, frustrated judges, and hostile relatives countless times. She held her ground and asked the question that had been bothering her since she walked into this room. "What exactly is wrong with him?" The chief physician's voice carried that particular tone that medical professionals use when they're explaining something to someone they assume won't understand. "The child's neural pathways are deteriorating at an accelerated rate. It is a rare genetic condition that affects the crystalline network structures unique to Zilithian physiology. There is no known treatment in our medical databases." Emily nodded, taking in the information, but something about his explanation triggered a memory. She walked closer to the medical pod, ignoring the way several doctors stepped back to give her space. The boy inside looked so small and fragile, his translucent skin barely glowing now. But as Emily watched those fading light patterns, something clicked in her mind. The rhythm of the flickering reminded her of something she'd seen. Years ago, back on Earth, there had been a foster child named Tommy Richardson, a boy who had suffered severe brain trauma in a car accident that killed both his parents. The neurologists had said his brain activity was too damaged for recovery. The patterns on their monitors had looked chaotic and dying, just like the light patterns she was seeing now. Emily knelt down beside the pod, so she was at eye level with the unconscious child. "Has anyone tried sensory integration therapy?" The question seemed to confuse everyone in the room. The Mindari healer, who had been communicating telepathically with the other doctors, turned her large dark eyes toward Emily. Her voice echoed directly in Emily's mind, carrying a tone of genuine bewilderment. "Sensory what?" "Sensory integration therapy," Emily repeated, looking around at all the blank stares. "On Earth, we've discovered that sometimes when the brain gets damaged or starts failing, it can actually be retrained. You use specific patterns of touch, sound, and movement to help create new neural pathways. The brain learns to work around the damaged parts." She gestured toward the dying boy. "I know his nervous system is different from ours, but the basic principle might be the same. Maybe these crystal networks can be taught to form new connections if we give them the right kind of stimulation." Dr. Vorthak's expression shifted from polite dismissal to something closer to scientific curiosity mixed with skepticism. "You are suggesting that primitive human therapeutic techniques could succeed where our advanced medical technology has failed?" Emily shrugged, not taking offense at being called primitive. She'd heard worse. "I'm suggesting that maybe you've been looking at this like a mechanical problem that needs fixing, when it might actually be more like a learning problem that needs teaching." She looked around the room at all the skeptical alien faces staring back at her. These beings had technology that could manipulate matter at the molecular level, ships that could cross galaxies, and medical equipment that could probably rebuild a body from scratch. But sometimes the most advanced solution wasn't the right solution. "Look," Emily said, her voice taking on the practical tone she used when dealing with difficult cases back home. "What's the worst that could happen if you let me try? He's already dying. Your equipment says he'll be dead within days. If I'm wrong, nothing changes. If I'm right." She let the sentence hang in the air. The Zilithian mother, who had been silent throughout most of the medical discussions, suddenly stepped forward. Her voice sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze, musical and fragile. "Please," she whispered, her crystal formations pulsing with desperate hope. "We have already lost 2 children to this disease. We will try anything." The father nodded, his own dim crystals flickering slightly brighter for the first time in hours. "If there is even the smallest chance, ... Emily looked back at Dr. Vorthok, waiting for his decision. Dr. Vorthok stared at Emily for what felt like an eternity before finally stepping aside. His gesture was reluctant, but he moved away from the medical pod with the air of someone who had run out of other options. Emily approached the dying child and placed her weathered hands gently on the smooth surface of the pod. She closed her eyes and began to hum. It was a simple melody, nothing fancy or complex, just an old lullaby that her own grandmother had sung to her decades ago, the same tune she had hummed to countless scared and broken children over the years. The melody drifted through the sterile medical bay like something from another world, which in many ways it was. The sound seemed impossibly out of place among all the high-tech equipment and sophisticated alien machinery. Here was this small, human woman, using nothing more than her voice and her hands, trying to accomplish what billion-dollar medical devices couldn't manage. To the watching alien doctors, it must have looked like someone trying to fix a quantum computer with a wooden hammer. Emily's hands began moving in slow, deliberate patterns across the pod's surface. She wasn't just randomly touching the glass. Years of working with traumatized children had taught her about the power of rhythmic, predictable contact. Her palms pressed gently, creating tiny vibrations that traveled through the pod and reached the boy inside. She varied the pressure and timing, following instincts developed through thousands of hours spent comforting children who had been hurt by the world. The alien medical staff gathered in a loose circle around her, watching with expressions that ranged from scientific curiosity to barely concealed disbelief. Some of them were taking readings on their instruments, probably trying to measure whatever Emily was doing in terms they could understand. Others just stood there, witnessing something they had no framework for comprehending. Dr. Vorthok couldn't contain himself any longer. "The neural patterns require precise calibration," he said, his voice tight with frustration. "This approach lacks any scientific methodology. You're essentially applying random stimulation patterns without understanding the underlying crystalline matrix structures." Emily didn't stop humming or pause her gentle hand movements. She had heard similar complaints from doctors and specialists throughout her career. "Maybe," she replied between verses of her lullaby, "but I've seen plenty of kids who were written off by experts before. Kids whose files said they'd never talk, never walk, never recover from their trauma. Sometimes they just need someone to believe they can get better." She looked up at the Zilithian parents, who were standing close together, their crystal formations flickering with something that might have been hope. "Come here," Emily said softly. "I want to show you something." The mother approached first, her movements hesitant. Emily gently took one of her crystalline hands and placed it on the pod next to her own. "Feel what I'm doing," she said, demonstrating the rhythm and pressure of her touches. "Your hands can create vibrations too, probably better ones than mine, since you're the same species." The Zilithian mother's touch was different from Emily's, where Emily created small mechanical vibrations through the pod's surface. The mother's crystalline hands seemed to resonate with the material itself. The pod began to hum with a frequency that Emily could feel in her bones. "Now, try humming with me," Emily instructed, continuing her simple lullaby. The mother's voice joined hers, creating harmonics that no human throat could produce alone. The father moved closer and added his own voice to the mixture, creating a sound that was both alien and strangely familiar. Emily showed them how to vary their touches, how to create patterns that followed the rhythm of their shared melody. In foster care, we learned something important, she explained as they worked together. Healing isn't just about fixing what's broken. It's about creating an environment where growth can happen. Sometimes a child doesn't need perfect medical treatment. They need to feel safe enough to try getting better. The Thaxian neural specialist suddenly stepped forward, her instruments beeping rapidly. The crystalline resonance frequencies are stabilizing, she announced, disbelief clear in her voice. The chaotic neural firing patterns are becoming more organized. Emily glanced at the readouts, but kept her focus on the child. Inside the pod, something was definitely changing. The boy's skin, which had been flickering randomly with dying light, was starting to pulse in a more regular pattern. The lights weren't brighter yet, but they were steadier, like a heartbeat that had found its proper rhythm. Dr. Vorthok moved closer, his multiple eyes studying both his instruments and the scene before him. "This is impossible," he muttered. "The neural degradation should be irreversible at this stage." Emily smiled without stopping her humming. Impossible is just another word for something nobody's figured out yet. On Earth, we've learned that children are tougher than most adults give them credit for. They have this amazing ability to heal and adapt, if you give them the right conditions. The child's light patterns continued to stabilize, growing stronger with each passing minute. The transformation didn't happen overnight, but it was steady and undeniable. Over the next 3 days and nights, Emily barely left the medical bay. She had set up a small cot in the corner and was taking turns with the Zilithian parents, maintaining the constant rhythm of humming and gentle touch that seemed to be bringing their son back from the edge of death. By the end of the first day, the boy's light patterns had not only stabilized but were actually growing brighter. The random, chaotic flickers that had looked like a dying computer screen were now pulsing in organized waves of soft blue and green light. Dr. Vorthok found himself checking and rechecking his instruments, unable to believe what his sensors were telling him. On the second day, something even more remarkable happened. The boy's crystalline nervous system began creating entirely new pathways around the damaged areas. It was like watching a river find a way around a fallen tree, carving out fresh channels that hadn't existed before. The alien medical team gathered around their monitoring equipment, watching in amazement as the child's brain essentially rewired itself. By the third day, the impossible had become reality. The boy opened his eyes for the first time in weeks. His parents rushed to his bedside, their own crystal formations blazing with joy and relief. The child tried to speak, his voice weak but clear, asking for water in the musical language of his people. Dr. Vorthok stood off to one side, studying the medical readings with the expression of someone whose entire understanding of medicine had just been turned upside down. His 6 arms gestured helplessly at the data streaming across his screens. The human approach appears to stimulate neuroplasticity in the crystal matrix, he finally admitted, the words coming out slowly, as if he was still processing what he was saying. Emily could see the internal struggle playing out on his alien features. Here was a being who had spent centuries mastering the most advanced medical techniques in the galaxy, and he was being forced to admit that a simple human with no formal medical training had succeeded where he had failed. "We focused entirely on the physiological breakdown," he continued, his scientific curiosity finally winning out over his wounded pride. "We analyzed the cellular degradation, mapped the neural pathways, calculated the rate of crystalline matrix failure, but we completely ignored the system's capacity for adaptation and self-repair." Emily looked up from where she was teaching the Zilithian mother a new humming technique. "It's not your fault," she said gently. "You were treating the disease. I was treating the child. Sometimes there's a big difference between those two things." Over the following days, Emily found herself working more closely with the alien medical team than she ever could have imagined. Dr. Vorthok, once he got over his initial shock, proved to be incredibly eager to understand how her methods worked. Together, they began developing ways to combine human therapeutic approaches with advanced alien medical technology. The Thaxian neural specialists designed sensitive instruments that could monitor the emotional and psychological aspects of healing, not just the physical ones. The Mindari healer learned to use her telepathic abilities to sense not just life energy, but the complex emotional states that Emily insisted were crucial to recovery. Back home, I've worked with kids who survived things that should have killed them, Emily explained as she demonstrated a new technique to a group of fascinated alien doctors. Car accidents, abuse, neglect, diseases that the medical textbooks said were fatal. And you know what the difference was between the ones who made it and the ones who didn't? She paused, making sure she had everyone's attention. It wasn't better medicine or more advanced treatment. Sometimes the difference was just refusing to quit. It was having someone who believed they could get better, even when they didn't believe it themselves. The breakthrough moment came on the 5th day. The Zilithian child, who had been confined to his medical pod for months, suddenly sat up on his own. His skin glowed, with healthy patterns of light that pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat. The crystal formations along his arms and face sparkled with an intensity that hadn't been seen since he was healthy. But what happened next made everyone in the room catch their breath. The child looked around until his eyes found Emily, and then he reached out toward her with small, perfectly formed crystalline hands. His movements were slow and deliberate, like someone learning to use their body again. But there was no mistaking his intent. Emily approached the pod and gently took his hands in hers. The moment their skin touched, the boy's entire body lit up with waves of golden light that rippled from his fingertips all the way to his toes. It was the Zilithian equivalent of a smile, and it was the most beautiful thing Emily had ever seen. Behind her, she could hear the boy's parents weeping. But these weren't tears of grief anymore. Zilithian tears looked like tiny diamonds, and they fell like a gentle rain of crystal as the parents realized their son was truly going to survive. The child spoke his first words in weeks, his voice clear and strong. Emily didn't understand the language, but she didn't need to. The meaning was written in the light patterns dancing across his skin, and the joy radiating from his parents. He was going to be okay. 6 months had passed since that impossible day, when a dying Zilithian child had opened his eyes and reached for Emily's hand. Now she stood in the most prestigious medical amphitheater in the galaxy, looking out at an audience that would have terrified her just a year ago. Hundreds of alien physicians filled the curved seating areas, representing dozens of species from across known space. Some had traveled for weeks just to hear what this small human woman had to say. Emily wore the same simple blue uniform she had been wearing that first day at Galactic Medical Station, Omega, though now it carried official insignia, marking her as the Director of Interspecies Therapeutic Integration. She still felt a little out of place among all the advanced technology and brilliant alien minds, but she had learned to trust in the power of her simple human approach to healing. Behind her, massive holographic displays showed data that even she found hard to believe. Recovery rates, patient outcomes, treatment success stories. The numbers told an incredible story of children who had been given up for dead, now thriving under what the medical community had officially named the Human Integration Protocol. The Zilithian boy wasn't our only success, Emily began, her voice carrying clearly through the amphitheater's advanced sound system. Over the past 6 months, we've successfully treated children from 17 different species using these combined methods. We've helped young Thaxians with neural trauma, Mindari children with empathic overload syndrome, and even a few human kids with conditions that Earth's doctors couldn't figure out. She gestured toward the holographic displays, where case studies rotated slowly in 3-dimensional detail. Each one represented a child who had been written off as hopeless, now living a healthy life because someone had refused to accept defeat. What we've learned is that the key to healing isn't in having the most advanced technology, Emily continued. It's not about having the biggest computers or the most sophisticated medical instruments. The key is in our refusal to accept that any child is beyond help. A movement in the audience caught her attention, and Emily smiled as she spotted a familiar figure making his way down the amphitheater steps. The recovered Zalithian child, now healthy and strong, approached the speaking platform with the confident stride of someone who had faced death and won. His skin glowed with vibrant patterns of blue and gold light, and his crystal formations sparkled like captured starlight. His parents had officially renamed him David, choosing a human name to honor the woman who had saved his life. He had become Emily's constant companion and assistant, traveling with her to medical conferences and training sessions across the galaxy. His unique perspective as both a patient who had experienced the treatment and a young person who could relate to other sick children made him invaluable to their work. David stepped up beside Emily and began to speak, his musical voice carrying easily through the amphitheater. He was addressing a group of alien medical students in the front rows, demonstrating some of the basic therapy techniques that had saved his life. His hands moved in the gentle, rhythmic patterns that Emily had taught his parents, while his voice carried the same soothing melodies that had first stabilized his failing nervous system. The students watched in fascination as David showed them how to combine the scientific precision of alien medicine with the emotional intuition of human therapeutic approaches. Some of them were taking notes on advanced data tablets, while others simply watched and listened, trying to understand this revolutionary approach to healing. What David is showing you represents something we humans learned a long time ago, Emily said, watching her young assistant work with the students. In foster care, we have a rule that guides everything we do. Every child deserves someone who won't give up on them. Every single child, no matter how broken they seem, no matter how hopeless their situation looks, deserves at least one person who believes they can get better. She paused, looking out at the hundreds of alien faces staring back at her. Some of these beings had medical knowledge that far exceeded anything humans had achieved. They could manipulate matter at the quantum level, regrow limbs, and cure diseases that would have baffled Earth's greatest doctors, but they had been missing something crucial in their approach to healing. As it turns out, Emily continued, that's not just human wisdom, it's universal truth. Children across the galaxy, regardless of their species or biology, respond to the same basic need. They need to feel safe. They need to know that someone cares about them, and they need to believe that getting better is possible. From his position near the front of the amphitheater, Dr. Vorthok stood up slowly. The chief physician of Galactic Medical Station Omega had become Emily's closest collaborator and strongest supporter. His transformation from skeptical alien doctor to enthusiastic partner in this new approach to medicine had been almost as remarkable as David's recovery. Dr. Watson has taught us something profound, Dr. Vorthok said, his 6 arms gesturing toward Emily with obvious respect. We spent centuries developing increasingly sophisticated ways to fight disease and repair damaged bodies. But we forgot that healing involves more than just fixing broken parts. He looked around the amphitheater, meeting the eyes of his fellow physicians. Perhaps the most advanced medicine isn't about having the best technology or the most detailed understanding of biological systems. Perhaps the most advanced medicine is simply knowing when to look death in the face and say, "Not today," Emily nodded, thinking back to that moment 6 months ago when she had first spoken those words. She had been a simple foster care worker. Then, with no medical training and no authority in the alien hospital. But she had possessed something that all the advanced technology in the galaxy couldn't replicate: the stubborn human refusal to give up on a child in need. Now, as she looked out at an audience of the galaxy's most brilliant medical minds, all eager to learn from her simple human approach, Emily realized that sometimes the most powerful medicine was also the most basic. Sometimes saving a life was as simple as refusing to let it end.